And then it says Americans' interest in spell casting tends to wax as instability rises and trust in establishment ideas plummet. One particular part in this article, it says casting spells and assembling altars have become quite lucrative. You can attend a fall equinox ritual organized by Airbnb, sign up for subscription witch boxes offering the equivalent of Blue Apron for magic making, and buy aura cleanses on Etsy. Instagram's reigning witch influencer, Brie Luna, has more than 450,000 followers and has collaborated with Coach, Refinery 29, Smashbox, for which she recently introduced a line of cosmetics inspired by, these crystals or whatever. So not only is witchcraft on the rise, but it's actually, a quite lucrative business. On TikTok, that's kind of the social media platform for Gen Z, some millennials on there, but they have a subsection of TikTok called Witch Talk, and it has over 5 billion views. It's probably more now, but there's a tons of witches on there, I guess, showing you how to do spells and magic and, pagan stuff. And so the question I want to ask is, how did we get to this point in society where things like, and I just picked out witchcraft just because I think it's the best visual example for what I want to talk about. But I want to know, like, how did we get here as a society, as culture? Because not only is witchcraft on the rise, but like New Age spirituality is on the rise. Paganism is on the rise. I believe that even within our own communities, the old Native American traditions, I think, are going to be on the rise as well. Talks of Mother Earth, and if you're familiar with the New Age, Gaia, which I think is like Greek for Mother Earth or something like that. Those things are all on the rise. And so I want to ask, like, well, how did we get to this point? How did we, where we're at now in the 21st century? How did a lot of our beliefs end up being tied back to ancient practices? How did that happen? And one of the books I've been reading, and I've talked about it for the past month, it's a book called Game of Gods, The Temple of Man in the Age of Reenchantment. And the summary of the book, the author says, can be summarized, in this one sentence, that humanity has 3 great desires: to be as God, to be masters of meaning, and to build heaven on earth. So that's the desires that we have as humanity. Speaking from a non-Christian perspective, we want to be like God. We want to have authority over the decisions we make and the path that we go along. And then in the process, we want to build a utopia or heaven on earth. We just don't want Jesus to be there.
Scott.
Yep.
Not to break your flow, but this is too important to just let it pass. But those are the 3 things. They're all Genesis things, right?
Yep.
To be like God is the first temptation.
Yep.
And then the other one is that what is the second one that you mentioned?
To be
the masters of meaning. I think that's also Genesis chapter 3. Genesis chapter 3. During the temptation, you will be like God, and you
Mhm.
can find meaning or meaning on your own. You don't have to go to God for that. And to build heaven on earth, that's the Tower of Babel thing, you know.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
That's what we've always been after, you know, is to forge our own destiny as humanity, um, to build a utopia here on Earth, uh, and that's what we're gonna look at. Um, and what the book does, what this book is it traces, I think, in a big picture sense, it traces the history of humanity, at least from the time of Jesus till now, into and this is putting it really plainly, but into three periods. And what he does is he traces history, from Christendom to modernity and then to post modernity. Um, and he also says in his book, and that's what I'm kind of doing, I'm just picking out different quotes from the book. He says the human story is a turbulent quest for knowledge and meaning. And it's no surprise that that's where we find ourselves today. Um, and so he traces the history of humanity into these three, I would say, uh, subsections, or I don't know what you want to call it, but he traces our history from Christendom to modernity to post-modernity. And then within Christendom, we have, he traces that all the way back to like maybe 300 AD, probably the earliest, when the Romans recognized, Christianity as the official religion of Rome. And that's where we get Roman Catholicism, although we would definitely agree with how they put that into practice. But that's really when Christianity became a political and economic institution. And I wouldn't really say that was for the better. It's probably not so much of a good thing. But that can be, we can probably debate that a different time. And then after Rome had control, we had like the Renaissance, and that was kind of a shift in thinking from, kind of a religious thought to more of philosophical type of thinking. Then in the 1500s, we had the Reformation, where we kind of put the Bible back to where it should be, and the Bible was above the church, because the Roman Catholic Church said that they were the authority, that the Pope was the authority. And then during the Reformation, Martin Luther, guys like John Calvin said, no, the Pope doesn't have authority. Our authority is to the Bible. And then later on in history, shortly after that, you get these different time periods that are defined by different things. We get the Age of Enlightenment, Romanticism, Realism. But what I want to draw our attention to is modernism and postmodernism, which is where we find ourselves currently. Modernism kind of became the dominant school of thought, if you will, a philosophical way of thinking about the world. And that really became, I don't want to say popularized, but that was the way of thinking from about the late 19th century into the 20th century. And the thinking of that time, it reflected the emerging, industrial world, the Industrial Revolution. And by and large, I wouldn't say wholly they rejected religion. But if you think back to the earliest 20th century, when things like communism and socialism were on the rise, there was definitely a push against religion. Religion was kind of looked down upon, especially by the scientific community. So, but I wouldn't say that there was an outright rejection of religion, because that wasn't the case. But, from at least from the scientific community, there was, atheism kind of started to be on the rise. Evolution became very popular, Darwinism. But also during modernism, the world was in conflict constantly. During modernism, we had World War I and World War II. And we know how World War II ended, with the atomic bombs in Japan. And in the book, he says this about and I would say the end of World War II, it wasn't the end of modernism, but it started the downfall of modernism, that type of thinking. And he says in his book that modernity demonstrated that when mankind is reduced to a soulless animal in an accidental universe, humanity becomes expendable. And so when atheism is the worldview, human life really has no meaning. And when that is the popular thought of the day, wars will tend to happen. And that's why the 20th century happened to be the bloodiest century in recorded history. And it was because of the thinking of modernity. Here he said that modernity revealed that we became enamored with the works of our hands and believed we could purchase our destiny. So remember back to that first, the summary of the book, that we wanted to be masters of meaning and destiny. And during the time of modernity, we thought we could build it, through the Industrial Revolution, through the advancement of science. We thought that we could buy it. And that wasn't the case, because the thinking behind it was faulty at its foundation. What modernity actually led to was death and chaos. And ultimately it left society disillusioned. So much so that, 15, 20 years later, people were protesting the Vietnam War because they saw what war had brought. It brought nothing but death. And so that I would say that patriotism, when it came to war, it was no longer there. And so people were protesting it. That's what, and this happened in the 1960s. And, the 1960s, you had the protests of the Vietnam War, the civil rights movement, things like that. And it also coincided with the hippie movement, where everything was about love and peace. And that really it was a response to the fruits of the modernist tree. And I was doing a little bit of research, but a lot of scholars think that the hippie movement was sort of the bridge between modern thinking and postmodern thinking. Here's a quote from the book. He said, "Contrary to what many humanists had hoped, modernity did not subdue or dismantle religion. Rather, it seeded a materialist faith in systems. Nor did the commanding bulwark of naturalistic philosophy create permanent barricades to spirituality. Religion was not disappearing, it was diversifying." So religion never really died during the modernist era, it was just changing. And you could see that in even though modernism could have been defined by sort of a rejection of religion, you see, if you do a little bit of research, especially during like World War II, the Nazis were heavily into the occult. They were really defined by occult practices, and there's plenty of books that talk about that. And so, because people became disillusioned with what modernist thinking ultimately produced, something had to replace it. And this is where we get the idea of postmodernism. It was a response to modernism, and therefore it was a critique of modernism. And that's why postmodern thinking can be defined by, some of the attributes are, it's cynical type of thinking, it's pessimistic, skeptical, especially of authority and cultural conventions. Everything was starting to be questioned, at this time, into the 60s and 70s. And then we get this idea that morality or truth is relative, that there is no objective truth, that truth is subjective, that, you can believe what you believe, I'll believe what I believe. Somehow we're both right. Neither one of us is wrong. You can believe whatever you want and you're right. And because of that idea of truth being relative, that there was no definition of what truth was or is, it's really hard to define what postmodernism is, or what postmodern thinking is how you identify it. It became difficult. And there was a book, I think that was written in the 1990s. It's called A Primer on Postmodernism. And the author says scholars disagree among themselves as to what postmodernism involves, but they have reached a consensus on one point. This phenomenon marks the end of a single universal worldview. The postmodern ethos resists unified, all-encompassing, and universally valid explanations. It replaces these with the respect for difference and celebration of the local and particular at the expense of the universal. So basically, like what I talked about, that truth is relative. You believe what you believe, I believe what I believe. And that's still somewhat the dominant thinking today. You hear those terms all the time. And these things kind of pop up. If you pay attention to the news and what's going on in culture, especially with all of this racial stuff that's going on in the world, one of the big things now is, we need to listen to people's lived experience. That's what our authority is now. If someone says they're oppressed, then shoot, we got to believe them because they said it. It's their lived experience. But we all know that lived experiences can be subjective. This person's lived experience can contradict this person's lived experience. And so a question we should be asking, well, whose experience is true then? And the postmodern would say, well, they're both true, even if they're at odds with one another. And so it's really hard to define what postmodernism is. It's like a lack of definitions. And the thinking of postmodernism, I think it is best because it kind of lacks a definition. Like you can't go and like, okay, this is a definition of what postmodernism is. It's something that you have to, the best way to explain it, I think, is through examples of the type of thinking behind it. And one example I like to use is in pop culture. You ever watch the show Malcolm in the Middle? If you're my age, you probably remember it. It was a show about a middle class or poor white family, but it centered around one of the sons. His name was Malcolm. He had three brothers, and then his mom and dad. But in the show, it would follow him and his family, and then at certain parts in the episode, he would they call it breaking the fourth wall. He would look at the camera and he would talk to the camera, like almost acknowledging that he was being recorded. It was like he was aware that the camera was there, which is, you watch movies from earlier decades, the camera is supposed to be a unnoticed thing, but here we're watching this TV show, and then he actually acknowledges that it's a TV show within the TV show. So it's like a breaking of conventions. Postmodernism can also be defined by like parody. Shrek, the movie Shrek is a good example of a postmodern movie because it references other materials, other pieces of artwork. The Simpsons is another type of postmodern pop culture thing. You get this fictional town with these characters, but then sometimes you'll see, there's episodes with Michael Jackson in it, or Bill Clinton. Certain celebrities will be in the show, and it's almost like it's kind of weird. And so the art that defined postmodernism it's just there's no rules, basically. And so he says here that modernity had been questioned and left wanting, yet the postmodern environment was incapable of laying a meaningful foundation. Because it's hard to define. Like, I'm even having a hard time describing it to you. Then he says, generations of war undermined modernity's potency, and a mishandled conflict triggered mistrust in government and anger towards authority. Postmodernism soaked into the nervous, sweating skin of society. But could anything lasting be built on shifting sand? Could non-meaning provide purpose and non-reason bring guidance? Could questions refusing answers exhibit wisdom? What was left? And so that's where he kind of left off in the book. What's left? Because postmodernism doesn't provide any answers to us. It gives us all these questions, but when your worldview is built off of there being no definition of what's true and what's not, how can you find answers to anything? And he rightly asks, what was left? And the answer is enchantment.
Oh, we muted.
And so enchantment it encompasses a wide range of things. I would say like the New Age, witchcraft, the occult, even within the scientific community, transhumanism. And I'll let the author, so this is the author of the book, I'll let him talk about it. I'll just play this short little clip.
To that term in academia is Partridge's two volumes,
Partridge, yes.
Re-Enchantment of the West.
Yes.
So I have a little bit of a feel for that, but I want you to sort of give us a little bit of a definition, because for our viewers out there, it might be a new term, and it's this notion. I mean, we are sort of conditioned to think that the West is dispensing with religion, becoming more secular.
Right.
But what's really happening is the exact opposite. So go ahead.
We are definitely becoming more religious, more spiritual, not necessarily religious. Of course, the common talk now is I'm spiritual but not religious.
Right.
And so there is a hunger for spirituality, a hunger for deeper meaning. And with it, there is a lot of religious flavoring that comes through. You can't divorce the two. I just returned, and I know the timing of this is somewhat important, but I returned a month ago from the Parliament of World Religions, where we had 7,500 religious leaders representing over 200 faiths, including secularist and humanist thinkers. recognizing that we're all searching for some form of spirituality, some sense of spiritual
Yeah,
connection.
something that transcends. Yeah.
Right. And reenchantment bumps into this in a significant way, because reenchantment is this longing for mystery, a longing for meaning, a longing for some transcendent reality, something beyond just the material, but not Christian. Not Christian.
Yeah, this sneaks up on people because I think the militant atheist crowd gets a little too much press.
They do.
And then the whole, there's the obligatory, especially around Easter, of how many churches are closing.
Right.
So we're conditioned to think that it's trending one way, but it's actually not.
No.
So all of the things that you're talking about just really kind of sneak up on people because we're used to, again, seeing the militant atheist, and again, they get too much press. You got Bill Maher, on TV, and everybody gets sort of their jollies out of him making fun of whatever it is, particularly, Christianity. You've got the scientific community, with Richard Dawkins, and you see enough of that, and you tend to think, well, this is where everything is trending. But it's actually not the case because most people don't want that.
Right.
They want
right.
something transcendent. And that's where you get into this. Now, you've used the word transcendent and mystery. You've used, I don't know if you've used myth itself, but I mean, that's a big part of this.
Yes.
Again, if you want something that transcends the material world, but you don't want, the traditional Judeo-Christian thing, or even the traditional anything, you've got to sort of fill that vacuum with something. And, what we do, here on this show, we like science fiction. Science fiction is a transmitter of these ideas, very, very obviously. And sure, you can watch, practically anything and see, Christian themes in it because, to steal the line from Lewis, it's the myth that's true and all that stuff. But there's an intentionality behind it that works against, Judeo-Christian themes. So I want you to talk a little bit about that because you have your head in that a lot. So
Right.
talk about the role of myth and archetypes. I mean, how does the culture?
So then he goes on to talk about, he defines what a myth is. And he says that myth it's not fairy tales or fables. That myth is actually a way to communicate a worldview. It's communicating a worldview through storytelling. And that's actually what the Bible does. The Bible is, and they touched on it. That's why C.S. Lewis called, Christianity the myth that is true, because it's communicating a worldview, but it's through narrative. And so I think moving forward, where is this going to lead us? I think we'll be able to communicate the Christian worldview easier. I think people will be more open and willing to listen to us, but I think that they're still going to reject it because of ultimately it goes against, our pride won't let us, the same thing that keeps people from believing now is pride. And this witchcraft, the new age spirituality, things like that, they're all about self. It's just, it's kind of a sanitized version, and it allows people to kind of mask it or disguise it as, they say finding themselves, but it's really a self-centered approach to, it's really a self-centered worldview. And we know that Christianity is the exact opposite. That our worldview is based off of, that we're sinners, that Jesus came, lived the perfect life, and, died on our behalf. And if we turn from our sins and trust in Jesus to save us, he will. But that's a hard pill to swallow for us, in our pride, to say that, we're sinners, that we're wrong, that we don't do good, and that our reliance is on someone else outside of us. And so I think that, and how this ties into what we're studying with the book of Revelation is, let's see, Revelation chapter 9. This was after the plagues. And it says those that were not killed, that they did not repent of their murders, their sorceries, their sexual immorality, or their thefts. And one of the key terms we looked at was sorcery. And, is that tied to, can we tie this? And these are just questions. Can we tie the transhumanist idea to this idea of enchantment? Are they connected? And so moving forward, there are a lot of unknowns moving forward. And I just think it's important that we at least be aware of these things, be aware of where the culture is going, where things are going, so that, we're not caught off guard and we can provide answers. And I think we can, based off of the things that we've been studying. I think we have an answer for all of these things, that these spiritual entities that are at work, that these witches and these new age practitioners and things like that, the spirits that are behind them and the spirits that they're communicating with, we know where they come from. We know that they were given authority over the nations from Deuteronomy 32. And so we have an answer for some of these things. And I think it's important that we do.
Scott, is this the bulk of your material for today?
Yep.
So I think the big takeaway for me is that the world, society, or humanity, they're not becoming more secular in a sense that they don't want to bother with the spiritual things or
Religion.
the religious things. Actually, that's the opposite. The experience of disillusionment, disappointment with with the past, with technology, and
Yep.
even with money, would actually move them to search for meaning somewhere.
Yeah.
And they're not turning to Christianity.
No.
They're turning to something else. But they're turning to what they call it, re-enchantment. What is
Yeah.
it that would say because they really become spiritual, more spiritual than before.
Yep.
And the Christianity has a big issue of credibility, and
Yeah.
we're losing them in
Yep.
that sense.
And we're seeing too, like even within Christianity, we're seeing a lot of people walk away from the faith. It seems like almost every week, every month, you hear of a new big name Christian that's walked away from the faith, whether it's like a pastor or a musician. It seems like it's happening more and more. Tons of Christian artists. And I'm not too familiar with a lot of Christian music, so I'm trying to think. There's some popular, like I was telling Lori this morning, but I'm not familiar enough with like the popular Christian music to know. But I want to say there was someone from like the Jars of Clay or something. Does that sound like a familiar? I think
Yes,
there's
Jars
someone
of Clay. They were an icon some years ago.
there. Okay. I
Christian,
think one of them
yeah.
walked away from the faith.
Really?
Yeah. Man, there's some other popular like from Christian bands. I can't remember. But yeah, there's quite a bit. But even Christians are walking away from the faith.
Yes.
And I think part of part of this, plays a part in it, because people are looking for answers, and they think, for some reason, they think Christianity doesn't provide them.
What has disenchanted? I think that's the term. For people who turn away from the faith. They were there already, but they turned away. They were disenchanted with what they see.
Yep.
I think the duplicity, again, like the issue of credibility of Christians and Christianity for that matter, especially for our people. The Indian people had been disenchanted many years
Are you
ago.
listening?
Yeah.
That's what you do.
Yeah.
So,
And that's why I think that's going to be on the rise too. I think a lot more people are going to get into the native, spirituality, because everybody's searching for something.
You know,
something
can I
greater
say,
than themselves.
this is Myra.
yeah, go ahead.
You know,
Matt.
I've been studying the last days of Christ, and it was like that then,
Mhm.
people are looking for answers. Like when the Palm Sunday, they thought Jesus was here to help them with that Roman Empire, to be their
Yeah.
king. That didn't happen, and all those people that followed him, that wanted healing, that wanted food, they when they didn't get those answers, they turn away. And I think that's the human condition, don't you think?
Mhm.
If it happened there, it happens now, and it will just continue to happen, because one of the things that as Christians we're required to do is walk by faith.
Mm.
And when we don't get the answers that we're seeking, and there's no faith, then they walk away.
Mhm.
So I don't think that we should be too surprised when that happens. Now, disappointed, yes, I'm very, very disappointed, and in fact, I will even cry over the situation sometimes. But it was there in the Bible, and we see it now, and I think we're just going to continue to see the increase in that, because the demonic does give answers, that they do see things do happen,
Mhm.
and so anyway, that's just my comment.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I think that we know, like, if we are living in the end, or we're getting close to the end, that we know that before Jesus comes back, that there's a falling away or an apostasy. And,
Right.
if this enchantment is on the rise, is that part of the reason why the falling away happens? That people, they don't outright, I don't think that falling away means they turn into atheists, or they don't think that there is no God. I think they start worshiping another God,
Yes.
the falling away.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and we know that there are many different gods.
Mm.
And just as Solomon built altars to these different gods when he fell away, I think that there will be, when certain people fall away, there will be many different gods that they will turn to.
And I think that is actually setting up the revelation scenario,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like you mentioned about the mark of the beast, or the image of the beast.
Mm-hmm.
And and the beast, as we studied him, he is actually from the ancient, ancient also. He's an ancient thing,
Yeah.
He was also here from the beginning. He just rebelled against God, and he will show up again in the last days. And he is a spiritual being, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So it's almost like the people who are looking for some kind of enchantment,
Hmm.
enchanting things,
Right. Yeah.
spiritual things, will turn to him.
Yeah.
So actually, it's making the case, like you mentioned, the image of the beast is not an icon, a physical thing. It's actually what a group of people, humanity that is reflecting who are going to reflect the image,
Yeah.
the beast.
Yeah. Because we remember from when we talked about a couple weeks ago, what does it mean to be made in the image of God?
Yep.
And what it really means is that we're God's representatives on earth,
Yep.
And so the image of the beast would be his representatives in a sense. It's more about who they're representing. And when we start talking about what the mark of the beast is, we'll see that it's not an actual physical mark that goes on your forehead or your right hand, because we've seen there's places in the Old Testament, and that's why I was glad Jarrett shared that video last week about the Shema, Deuteronomy chapter 6, that you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your might, with all your soul. And when Israel recited that, God told them that they were to take those words and to bind them on their hand, they were to be as frontlets between their eyes, which means on their forehead. And they were supposed to remember that, what God had done for them, brought them out of Egypt, and they were to remember that. And so I think in a way, and we'll talk about this in the next couple of weeks, that I think the mark of the beast is an anti-Shema, or
Oh wow.
something like that. And it's not an actual physical mark, just as the image refers to a collective group of humanity that represents the beast. We represent God. Is it possible that these transhuman entities, these transhuman beings, are then the beast's representatives on earth? They're his image, made in his likeness, and that the mark of the beast is their allegiance to him in some sort of Shema, anti-Shema.
Scott, so it's really the last days, the battle that we are looking, that we're expecting is really spiritual in nature.
Yep.
It's not like, nuclear bomb popping everywhere. It could be,
Yep.
but the main thing really is spiritual, right?
Yes.
The Antichrist is not going to be somebody, a world leader maybe, but he is a spiritual person.
Yep.
And wow.
Yeah. And I have a theory that it's possible that the powers of darkness might try and take the things that we commonly think of. Because if you asked an average person what the mark of the beast is today, they would say, oh, it's like a microchip or something that they put in your hand so you buy and sell. And what I think is a possibility is they might try and do something like that and fool a bunch of people into thinking that that is the mark of the beast, and that the Antichrist is the one who steps in and stops it. And we all think that's Jesus. And we all start worshiping that person. And we start I don't know. I think it's possible. That's just
Well,
something.
yeah. Okay. If it's not a microchip, so go ahead. Take the vaccine. Have yourself vaccinated by the COVID thing, and but it's really. But the thing is, the other thing before we close, I'd like to say this. The challenge then is how we could um, present Christianity as actually a valid alternative to the other side.
Mhm.
But it's not going to be, the presentation is not going to be how we have been doing it. We
Yeah.
had to come up with something else to present the narrative, of Christianity, that is biblical. But, like you said, it has to be some kind of a story.
Yeah.
We have to tell them. So that's why in a few weeks, we're going to start again the training through the internet with Mark Costello, Scott.
Okay.
We
Yep.
are setting up the training on Bible storying again, how to do it. So hopefully that will help us equip on how to present the gospel, Jesus, more effectively, present a more credible narrative of the gospel than before.
Mhm.
I just have a comment. Uh, when Scott was showing the different ages, different uh, time frame,
Mhm.
I just feel like going back to the time of Moses when he tried to save the Israelites from Egypt. And they have seen the miracles, and yet during the desert time when God was really testing them and preparing them to enter the promised land, they decided still to worship the golden calf.
Yep.
Mhm.
So
That's another
really,
perfect example.
Yeah.
really the situation when we thought Christianity was on the rise, we don't know who are really Christians, because some of them, because Christianity was a popular religion at the time,
Yep.
Yeah.
so a lot of them are really there for selfish reasons,
Yeah.
not really
Right.
for God himself, not really for Christ himself.
Yeah.
So it could be a bit discouraging for us to see the situation right now, but I would say let us copy the Moses, even Jesus.
Mhm.
1 week after all those people who said Hosanna
Yeah.
turned
Killed him.
against
They were
him.
shouting for Barabbas.
Yep. Yep. And there could be millions of people shouting for his death,
Yeah.
So yeah, we let's focus on Jesus
Mhm.
rather than being discouraged on the
Yeah.
situation.
It's about wanting Jesus, for who he is,
Mm-hmm.
not what he can give us. Because we even looked at a couple weeks ago that even when Jesus returns in the millennial kingdom, that there are people that don't worship him.
Yes.
Like he's there, we see him, and people don't worship him. I mean, there's angels in heaven that were with him that decided to rebel. And so God,
Yeah.
it really points to the real root issue is our hearts and our attitudes and our desires, that God isn't going to force us to
No.
love him, and many people are going to turn away. And that's why I think the falling away, people are going to know what they're doing. They know that they're turning away from
Oh, yeah.
God,
Yes.
but they do it anyway. And so
Like I
we have
said,
to ask ourselves, like, what do we really want?
amen. And I think that's what you mentioned also about, the mark of the beast. It's not something that, they will
Hold on.
come on us with,
Take a picture of
with deception in a subtle
Yeah.
way. There's not gonna be subtlety
Yeah.
Giving the mark of the beast, it's something that you
Send
willingly
it to your mom.
Yeah.
receive it. Yes.
Yep.
Anyway,